I'll probably do a short video here in the next few days on how to rig inline dropper systems with barbless hooks. Hey gang, this is Tim from Tim on the Fly, and in a previous video I'd talked about dropper rigs that I was fishing, and I'd mentioned that I'd come up with a little different way to tie those rigs to accommodate for the fact that I was using barbless hooks, and I thought I'd just sit down for a moment and talk to you about that. What we've basically done here is we've done a dry dropper rig. I've got a beetle on the front, and I've got it dropped off to a little nymph on the back, and that's going to be our dropper rig. But I've set this up a little differently than what's traditionally thought of. There's a couple of different ways that people normally think of doing dropper rigs. One is that they just tie the dropper tippet off the bend of the hook, and that works great except for one problem. We're using barbless hooks, so there's nothing to hold that dropper on, and sooner or later you're going to cast it or get a fish and they're going to pull that dropper off the end of the hook and it's going to be gone. The other way to do that would be to tie onto the eye of the hook. However, especially if you're fishing for panfish, bass, things like that, where the tippets are going to be fairly heavy, fairly thick, the eye of the hook is very often going to be too small to get both of those tippets through easily and still let your fly move freely on the water. So what I've done is I've taken the dropper and I've actually attached it up a little ways onto the leader in a way so that it'll slide back and forth. Okay, so the way this dropper rig is rigged is fairly simple. We're just going to take our dry fly, in this case my foam beetle, and we're going to tie it onto the line, onto the main leader. However you want to, whatever knot you're feeling comfortable with is going to be fine. And then we're going to take a piece of tippet. In this case it's going to be 3X, but I usually like to go one size smaller than what I'm going to be fishing on the main leader, so that if something breaks it's going to be the tippet. But for the sake of being able to see this on the video, we're going to go with 3X, which is the same size as the tippet I'm running. And what we're going to do with this, instead of tying something directly to the fly itself, we're going to, without the fly, we're going to tie a clinch knot, very similar to what I would normally use if I was going to be dropping off the tail end of the hook. We're just going to tie this clinch knot kind of in the air here. If I can get that tag end caught. There we go, and we're going to tie that clinch knot, and it's going to be open like this. And what we're going to do with that, before we cinch that any tighter, is we're just going to take that and we're going to put the fly through that loop that we've made. We're going to cinch, then we're going to cinch that clinch knot down over the leader itself rather than over the fly. And that way that leader's going to be free to slide up and down. That dropper leader is going to be able to slide up and down independently of the fly. And we're just going to take our nippers and, making sure that we get the right tag end, we're going to trim off that tag end on that. And then all we have to do is tie a fly onto the bottom of our tippet and we're ready to roll. And that's going to do a number of things for me. For one thing, it frees me up from having to anchor that dropper on the fly somewhere. I don't have to tie off the bend, I don't have to tie off the eye of the hook either way. That's basically how I've got it set up. I'll tell you a little bit about why I set that up and what some of the advantages are. I already talked about the main advantage of dropping off of the back of the hook. And that's that basically with a barbless hook you don't have any way to hold that dropper on there. So that's fairly simple, and we've gotten around that with this one. Tying off the eye of the hook, besides having two pieces of tippet through the eye of the hook and having that sometimes affect the way the dry fly is going to lay on the water, the other thing that can happen there is if both flies are anchored to each other directly and you should happen to get two fish, trout fishing, it's usually not a problem. I think I've had it happen once in all the times I've trout fished with droppers. But when you're pan fishing, bluegills, things like that, especially when they're feeding aggressively and they're feeding in schools, those double hookups happen fairly often. And if you've got both of those flies anchored to each other so that that tippet is straight in between, then you've got a situation where you're not really in control of being able to apply tension to that. And sooner or later, especially with two barbless hooks, one of those fish is going to either pull tight enough against the other fish that it's going to pull free, and that's usually the biggest fish you lose. If you've got, say, a bass and a bluegill on at the same time or something like that, you're probably going to lose the bass that way. The other thing that can happen is in a situation where you're anchored directly to the lead hook and you've got a good fish on the bottom hook, you can't keep tension on that all the time because your tension is going to be with the top hook. If you've got that second fish on there, you got one on the top, one on the bottom, you're going to be fighting that top fish, and that bottom fish is going to be free to create slack. And with barbless hooks, that slack means that hook's going to drop out. Now, is it a big deal to lose one of those fish? No, because you probably are going to land the other. But, you know, those doubles are kind of cool when they happen. But the other thing that's going to happen, and this is the thing that's more important to me, is that I'm very hesitant to fish dropper flies around cover, because invariably what's going to happen is you're going to get a fish on the top fly or the bottom fly. They're going to swim into the cover, and that second fly is going to get hung up. And a lot of times, you know, if that fish gets hung up bad enough, you're going to have to break him off. And I just hate the idea of leaving a fish anchored to whatever my other hook is snagged to. So with this system, with the leader sliding up and down independent of the fly, I'm never going to have that problem. If I have a fish on the back hook and the front fly gets snagged up and I break it, then this is going to break off, and that knot is going to slide right off the end of my line, and this fish is going to be free to swim off, and invariably he's going to shake that hook because it's barbless and I've got nothing to worry about. If I'm fishing a fly, if I get the fish on the top hook and the bottom hook gets hung up, then I break off, and again the bottom hook comes loose. The fish has the top hook in his mouth, but it's barbless and he's free to swim off and shake that barbless hook loose anytime. So I'm never going to have to worry with this rig about leaving a fish hung up somewhere because I had to break him off, and that fish dying because he wasn't able to get free of that second hook being snagged on a stick or a weed or something like that he couldn't get loose. Another advantage to this setup with the sliding rig is that changing the nymph on the bottom has always been easy. You just snip it off, you tie another one on. Changing the dry fly with the fly anchored to this means changing everything out and having to retie all your knots. Whereas with the sliding rig, all you have to do is slide your dropper up, clip off your dry fly, tie on a new dry fly, slide your dropper back down to the fly, and you're off and running again with the new dry fly and the same dropper. So, couple of good reasons there for that rig. The one thing that I worried about is how that friction back and forth would affect the strength of the leader over time. And so far I've been fishing this rig all summer, and that hasn't been a problem. Of course, one of the things I do is I fish a lighter tippet than I do a main leader, just like you would with a lot of other dropper rigs. And so if something's going to break, chances are it's going to be the tippet, and you're not going to lose your whole rig. But like I said, so far that hasn't happened. I think if you use this rig on trout where you were fishing 6 and 7x tippet, things like that were really thin, that might be a little more of an issue. But for panfish, I'm fishing mostly 3x leaders, 4x tippets, or 4x leaders, 5x tippets. And so far it just hasn't been a problem. The fish haven't been able to put enough pull on that at that angle to be able to create a breakage issue. I've had a few snags. Now that's the bad part. If you snag up, especially if you snag up the top hook, the odds of losing both hooks gets pretty good. But I'd rather lose that second fly once in a while than have to think about losing a fish somewhere and have it die because it was hung up and couldn't get away. So there it is. That's my answer to rig and dry droppers for warm water fish with barbless hooks. Might give it a try sometime. If you do, let me know how it works out for you. Like I said, it's worked out great for me. Tight lines. We'll see you in the next one.